Today's date is May 9th, 2017. We're here at the Evansville Wartime Museum in Evansville, Indiana, and this is Stephen Bredhold. He's a retired CB, and his mother also worked at Chrysler, and he will talk about that. And we're going to talk about the bullets that were made at Chrysler, and he'll go over the mechanism of the guns that were required in World War II and helped us win World War II. And Evansville was a major contributing factor for Evansville in World War II, and we're going to go over some details. And Stephen, or Brian Bredhold, knows a lot of this information. So Brian, you've got something in your hand there. Can you tell us how important that was in World War II?
It was highly important. Almost every officer carried one of these, and a lot of your non-commissioned officers carried a lot of these. This is the model 1911 A1 45 semi-automatic pistol. It holds 7 shots in the magazine and will also hold one in the chamber at the same time. Now, this shoots what's called a 230 grain ball bullet, and the Chrysler plant here in Evansville made in excess of 3 billion of these during the Second World War. This was all between 1942 and 1945 until their contract was canceled. If you get to measuring them out and laying them end to end, 3 billion bullets will go around the world 3 times and have a little bit left over. So that can give you an idea of just exactly how important it was. They used a lot of bullets. Mom worked in the lab over there. They were doing some experimental stuff for storage on the brass, so she worked a whole lot with the brass part of this, trying to get formulas and formulations so that it would store properly and not have problems, especially in the South Pacific because it was so humid down there, and of course the salt air. The normal 45 comes with wood grips on it. This has some other grips on it, but it was very, very important. It's good for up to about 50 yards very accurately, and of course there are others that can go better. It depends on the person behind that a whole lot, but it's a devastating round. It was brought in 1911 basically, and that was after the Philippine insurrection. They found out the 38 caliber stuff just wasn't working well. It didn't take the people down, and so they went away from the 38 caliber, which is also the same size as the 9mm 3.56, and went to the 45, and they found that was very effective in doing the job and actually taking the people out. When you aimed at them and fired, it would actually do enough damage that it would take them out of action. And a lot of times in the military, you're not actually trying to kill your opponent, you're trying to take them out of action, you're trying to wound them, because it takes more to take care of a wounded person than it does a dead person. So that's part of the stuff behind that. It's a very easy firearm to shoot, although it's got I guess you could say, a kind of a heavy recoil for a pistol. Up until recently, it was probably one of the heavier. They always recoil up and to the right. When you have your magazine in there, to load it, all you do is this lever here on the side, push it down, and there's the familiar click of the slide going into battery, and it's ready to fire. Every time you pull the trigger, it will fire a round. The slide will function, put another round into the chamber, and you're ready to fire again, up to 7 times. After the last round is fired, the slide will lock back on it like this, and you'll know you're empty. You need to change it out. And to do that, there's a button over here you press on the side, and I can show you that real quickly. You just press this button, and the magazine will pop down. Just like that.
So it was pretty user-friendly in World War II. Didn't take the troops a long time to learn how to use this gun and the mechanism. They got pretty adept at it quickly.
Correct. It didn't take a whole lot of time, and they're very functional actually. They'll take a lot of dirt and grime before they actually jam up. Of course, any firearm, you have to keep it clean, and that's one of the things that every one of the services are really good on is keeping the stuff clean. But they will take a whole lot of abuse and still function like they're supposed to. Okay, on the bullets, a little bit more specific, they have what's called a head stamp on them. you'll see on the bottom there'll be numbers and letters. On this one, it was actually made here in Evansville during the war. It's got stamped on there EC, and it has 43. And that means it came out of Evansville in 1943 is when it was manufactured by Chrysler Corporation. That's what the EC stands for, Evansville Chrysler. This is, again, one of the brass bullets that they had, but there for a short time, they had to switch things up, and they went to steel cases. This gave them a real challenge because steel is a lot different to work in a press, to get it to work the way you need to crimp down on the bullets, to hold the bullets, to expand properly in the gun so it holds the gases in and makes the bullet go right. So they really had a lot of problems, and this is where my mom was working too, in the metallurgy part of the lab. And it was very successful. They had a world of talent in there in order to be able to take care of this stuff. It's unbelievable how quickly they did this. Their contract went from $2 million a month to over $12 million a month in a month's time. They had 3 contract increases that quickly. I think if I remember correctly, it went from $2 million to $7 million and then to $12 million. And they performed. And they performed very, very well. They were recognized by the president for performing that. Now, here are boxes of ammunition. This is another box of the ammunition that came out of the Evansville plant. And this is the original stuff. This is worth a pretty good bit of money, actually. And it's not bad. You know, it doesn't weigh a whole lot, you know, per box amount. But when they send it out of the plant, they send it out like this. Now this weighs probably close to about 30 pounds. It actually has 600 cartridges in there. Now these are bulk packed. These are not packed in the boxes like this, but they're still very, very tightly packed in there. 600 cartridges. And they would put these out about every hour and a half. You would have a bunch of these come off the machine, off the lines, go on pallets, and they would be shipped out. Actually, they were shipping them out to begin with, out where the 4-H center is now. They have storage facilities out there. Most of them are gone now, but they would put them out there, and they from there would be put on a train and shipped out to the coast, either east or west coast, to be sent overseas to the troops.
Okay.
This is a book that a gentleman kept records of. It worked in the labs. The title of it is Chrysler Evansville Ordnance Plant, Operations and Processes for Caliber 45 and Caliber 30 Carbine Ammunition by E.W. Jones. Now, this has notes from the time frame. It shows here the steel cartridge cases 11/30/43. So that gives you an idea of when they were working on that. He kept very meticulous records on this. September of 42. Preparation of strip for blank and cut and cup. So they could actually press these shells out, the brass, and get it formed up on the machines. There was a lot of steps involved. But can you imagine 100 of these every minute popping out loaded and ready to go? That is just a phenomenal feat to put out that amount of ammunition. But they did it at Chrysler, and they did it well. They're a very important part of the history of Evansville. This book is just, I would say, invaluable, because I don't think there's another one like it. It's one of those things that you have very few individuals keep those kind of records. Most people, they're getting up, they're going to work, they do their job, they go home, and they forget about it. They have another cup of coffee and they don't worry about it. You have gentlemen like this that's in that lab, and he's taking notes because he wants to know in the future, and he wants people to know in the future exactly what it took to do this job, and how, if they had to, they could do it again. So it's really something. It's a fascinating book to read. I'd love for everybody to be able to look at it, but of course you can't handle it too much because it'll deteriorate it too much.
Okay.
This picture shows a line being worked on here. Now this is why they could turn out so much ammunition. Just that you can visibly see very easily here, there are 15 machines, and each one of those is turning out ammunition, and it turns it out quickly. The ladies would stand there day after day, hour after hour, and they would make sure this ammunition come off of here was correct. If there was a call, they would get it out of there, but they had the machines set up so finely that it would come out, and it would come out very well. This production supervisor here kept record of all the ammunition that came out of there from start to finish. Each one of these machines counted how many shells were actually coming out of it, so they could keep a very good record. That's why they know to the bullet exactly how many of these shells were produced during the Second World War.
And Chrysler had never made bullets before. This was
No. They made a very quick change to go into bullet production. The government came in, they looked at it, said, okay, can you do this? And they told them, yeah, we can do it. And they did it. And they did it exceptionally well. This is an inspection line in this picture here. The people were sitting here, the shells would go in front of them, and they would look at every one of them and make sure they were properly, the bolts were properly seated, the shells were properly formed, the primers were properly into them. After they got through that, they all came down and went to a bin. And you can see here, there's thousands of bullets in that bin, ready to go out and go on the line and get put in boxes or into canisters to be shipped out. But they did this for their full shift. That's what they did, and they got paid pretty good for that because they had to make sure those bullets were going to perform. That was the really critical part of it. We're going to revisit this container. It's actually fascinating in its history. In the Pacific Islands, the air is always very humid. It's a lot of salt air in there, so it really can deteriorate your shells very quickly. So they had a gentleman that actually graduated from Boise High School here in Evansville in 1928, and then he graduated from the University of Evansville in 1932. He was working there at Chrysler, and he invented the vacuum server for these boxes to go through to test their integrity to make sure they were watertight. Actually, at that time too, some people don't realize that these were actually being made so they could store them underwater for a time frame, so they would be hidden from the enemy. They could actually take this stuff, parachute it in just off the coast, and that way the troops could go in, they could get this stuff and have their ammunition there, so they didn't have to try to carry so much of it in with them on the assaults. Mom actually was working on this part when she went over there. She had started out working at Republic Aviation, and the government had her transferred because she had gone to college and was in the lab. So they had her transferred to Chrysler so she could help work on this project. It was really fascinating to hear her talk. I miss talking to her about it so much. She really gave me a lot of information. But they developed this canister, believe it or not, in less than a week, and had it set up so that it would hold 600 rounds of .45 ammunition. It's totally unbelievable in today's standards in a way that they did this stuff so quickly and so efficiently and had it together. And the gentleman made his invention, and it was set up right away at Chrysler. They were one of the foremost producers of the ammunition for the government. And it's just mind-blowing to me that they did what they did and how they did. I mean, they produced the ammunition, but they also turned out a whole lot of tanks out there too. And that's right at the corner of Stringtown Road and Maxwell Avenue. That's the old Chrysler plant. The buildings, some of them are still standing. Part of the stuff is still there. Unfortunately, time has taken part of our history away from us with what they call improvements. But I still get fascinated every time I go by there to know my mom worked inside that plant and helped do so much to win the war.
Who was her friend there? What was that weather lady's name?
Her friend was Marcia Yockey, and she grew up with Marcia. And it was some of the stories that they used to tell together was just it was riotous. Of course, everybody that knows Marcia knows she had a personality out of this world. But to hear them talking and telling some of the stories is just absolutely hilarious to listen to. I've had a lot of hours of good laughs over it.
And then we still have some of the places where they stored out by the 4-H center. Some of the mounds are still out at 4-H center where they.
Some of the old bunkers are still out there. They've taken a lot of the dirt off of them. In fact, all the dirt off of them, so you can still see them sitting out there. But they had a whole lot more at one time, and they had a rail system that went out through there. The rail cars could be put up in between those bunkers, and they take the ammunition right out of the bunkers into the rail cars, and they would immediately get on the move out of here. At one time, we had 7 railroads here in Evansville, and that was part of the heart of it. That's why we were on a big bomb list from Hitler, because we had so much transportation here. We had the river, we were producing the LSTs down there, they were producing the tanks and ammunition at Chrysler, at Servell, they were making wings for the P-40 Warhawks for out here at Republic Aviation. We were a beehive of activity in Evansville. We did a fantastic, tremendous part of supporting all of our troops and helping to win the Second World War. This box is an example of how most of the ammunition went to the European theater. They didn't have the problem with the humidity and moisture so much over there, so they had it in the wooden boxes, and there were 50 cartridges per box in the cardboard boxes. There were 27 boxes in here, and if you get to counting, there's 1,350 rounds of ammunition in there. This is only 600 rounds. However, this is waterproof. This isn't. This actually came out of the Evansville Chrysler plant in 1944. Here's the date right down there. So they were producing both of these at that time frame. They were packaging them out like this, they were packaging them out like this. It all depended on where they were going to go for their action.
Okay.
This was a .30 caliber M1 Carbine. These shells were made by Evansville Chrysler also. The gun is kind of interesting in the fact that it was actually invented by a man that was in prison. His nickname was Carbine Williams. His actual name was Cleve Williams. And he was trying to figure out something he could do to help out the process of the war and the military. He knew enough to know that in the jungle you need a short-barreled gun, and it needs a short action for a semi-automatic. And he was actually in solitary confinement when he figured out how to do this. When he got out of solitary confinement, he actually made the first one out of a wheel axle and a fence post.
What year did he do that?
That was 1941, if I remember correctly. Don't quote me, I don't remember that for sure off the top of my head. It might have been 42. But he was a very sharp guy. Winchester Repeating Arms Company actually hired him after that, and the last that I knew of, he had like 63 patents on firearms. He got a complete pardon from the governor of North Carolina. So he was able to go ahead and do this stuff. He was a pretty sharp fella, but he got put in jail. They had raided a still that he was working on, and somebody killed one of the government agents, and that's why he was in jail, because of that. He got caught. The others, some of them didn't. But this is a short action gun. It's not a very long action. The bullets are small. I'll get one of these out so you can get a better idea of it.
Tell us, this was important in World War II, right?
It's very important in World War II. They used these extensively.
Let's see that bullet again. Put that back in your hand. Let's see that again.
They used these extensively in the Pacific campaign, and they adapted these.
Side like that. Yeah, so, yeah, like that. Yeah, perfect.
They adapted these for the paratroopers to use too. They had folding stocks that they made on them, and they actually had some of these. The fourth version that they were actually fully automatic, and they would go through a lot of ammunition pretty quick. The accuracy on these is not good, not as good as like your .30 caliber M1 Garand or your 03A3 Springfield. It doesn't have quite the capability, but it will still shoot out about 400 yards very accurately and does a wonderful job overall. It did exactly what it was intended to do. The government always had great specifications on their firearms. On the last round, when it fires, it will lock this open again, just like the 45 did, so that the person knows that they're out of ammunition and need to change the magazine out. It was equipped with a Bayonet Lug, which is down here, and this is the bayonet for it. And it's quite easy to put on for the most part. You have two things to line up, the end of the barrel and the lug down here, and there it is. So they could do hand-to-hand combat with that. Kind of a wicked little combination once you got right down to it. To load it is really easy. All you're doing is taking that magazine, shoving it up in there, just like that. This is a 20-round magazine is what it came originally with. And then they developed a 30-round magazine, and this is what is also known as a banana clip sometimes. Clip being a misnomer. These are not clips. This is a clip. It holds the ammunition like this. Can be used to very quickly load these. To take it out, you simply push this button here, and it drops out of there.
Tell us what the enemy thought when it was out, that ping sound.
Well, now that was on the Garand. That wasn't so much on this, because the Garand used an end-block clip, and it would shoot it out the top. I'll show you that in a little bit. This was a very handy gun. They made literally millions of these things. You can still find some today. I can remember when you could pick these up for about $30 a piece. You can't get it for anywhere close to that now. There are some post-productions. Universal, I think, is one of them that's still putting out 30 caliber M1 Carbine. And it's still a popular shooter today. A lot of people get ammunition for them and reload them with their own ammunition and buy factory ammunition and still fire them. I still see people at the range firing them now. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't have a lot of recoil. So it's really a good one to get out and plink with. Although plinking anymore is getting more expensive with this type of ammunition, as with any ammunition. But this was very important. Evansville Chrysler made well over 450 million of these bullets for these things. So again, that was a huge amount of production in their facilities. They did a very good job. They also were put into metal cans and went through the VacuServe, so they were sealed up right, and they could test them and make sure that they could be dropped overseas in the Pacific and Far East areas for the troops to use.
Pull a set of bullets out. Just put them up so people can see a whole set there.
Okay. This is a what's called a stripper clip full of bullets. See, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So it was really easy to keep up with. When they went to load up their gun, or their clips, excuse me, their magazines, they already knew there were 10 per one of these. So if they had a 20-round magazine like this, they'd use 2 stripper clips to fill it up. If they had a 30-round like this, they could use 3 of the stripper clips and do it. I'm not going to load it out because these are not mine. But there are little teeth right here that are normally bent in, and this would fit down on there. And you simply push down on the top, and it would push those 10 bullets down into that magazine very, very quickly, very efficiently. So if they were in the middle of battle and they had to load some, they could get their magazines loaded very quickly and get back into action.
These bullets, 450 million in Evansville, Indiana. On the bottom of those bullets, does it say Evansville Chrysler?
Yes.
Most of them made there.
It will still say on the bottom of them, EC for Evansville Chrysler, and then it'll have the date on there too. That's the head stamping, and that was required so that they could trace all of the ammunition to where it came from in case there was a problem. Some of the problems that you could have would be a cracked case because the brass was too brittle or too thin, and it would open up after it was fired in the gun. And what that'll do is that can jam the gun up. It can make it so it's non-functioning, which is definitely something you don't want when you're in a battle. So,
and they made steel casings for the 30 caliber just as well as
they
did with the
made a
45.
few of those, but that was less of those than there were the 45s. Because of the small dimensions of the 30 caliber M1 Carbine shell, it was a lot harder to make those out of steel. The 45 had a little bit more give in it, but they did make some, but they were very limited run. That was in 1943, and I think if I can remember correctly, they only did that for about 3 months, and then they went back to brass. They were able to do that again. But you'll note on these, you can see the gray on the end of it is lead, where it's actually showing there, and then you have copper below that. And so they were saving copper.
Hold that up so we can see, yeah.
They were actually saving copper, and this is what they would do. But what this also does too is it makes it more expansive when it actually hits to mushroom out and cause a bigger injury. And that, of course, is what you're wanting to do when you're in war, is just cause more injuries. But that was a way they could also save on the copper. The cupola, the gilding copper is what that is made out of. It's a very good copper, but it's also malleable.
So that when I just put that there, the very top part's of lead, and then it's copper, and then below that is all the brass, and the gunpowder is most of the bullet. Most of that is gunpowder in the back.
Your gunpowder is in here, and then on the bottom is your primer.
Okay, that's the M1, and both used in Europe and in the and in Japanese theater.
All fronts of the war, the M1 carbine was used. They were used in Alaska. A lot of people don't realize that we did actually have action in Alaska on Kiska and Attu. They're the furthest islands out on the Aleutian Island chain. They actually bombed Dutch Harbor, which is further in, closer to the mainland. But they went in and they occupied Attu and Kiska. They didn't stay very long, and they were soundly defeated up there, so they stayed out. But the reason they invaded the Aleutian Islands was to help fend off our forces and try to get them faked out, as it were, when they were going after Midway. The idea was to pull our forces to the northern Pacific area away from Midway so they could go in and take Midway. They didn't realize at that time that we had broken their code. We had some really sharp guys out there in Pearl, and they had broken the code, and they figured out that they were going after Midway. So it didn't really work as well as they wanted. But it did wake up the people of America that, yes, we could be invaded. And especially happened after they killed some people actually in Oregon with a bomb. Those were balloon bombs that they floated in.
And this gun seemed to work all right in that cold weather, and it was a workhorse for the American soldier. I mean, we got the M1 Garand, but this M1 was a big workhorse, saved a lot of men's lives because of the 450 yards or 400 yard range, which is awful good, much better than the pistol you just showed us.
Definitely. And the idea is it was made for jungle use. I mean, when you get into a jungle area, you can't have a really long gun sticking out there, because when you go to swing, there's something there to grab it, vines and undergrowth and stuff like that. So you want a shorter firearm that you can carry along to use in that setting. And this came in perfectly. Part of the testing that they did on that after it was made, it had to be dipped into mud and then just washed off in some muddy water, and it had to function. And it had to function repeatedly. It couldn't just fire 2 or 3 bullets and then stop. No, it had to go hundreds of bullets without major malfunctions. And the M1 carbine did exactly that.
And our parachuters in World War II, supposedly 50,000 parachuted over a 4-day period of time around D-Day, and most of them had a rifle such as this one with them. The Germans dropped all of their paraphernalia in a separate parachute, and then sometimes they couldn't find it, where the Americans would land with a weight that was double the body weight when they hit the ground. And they usually had a rifle, and it's not easy to land with a rifle, but most of them had one.
Correct. And this is one that they used extensively. They also used the model 1928 Thompson submachine gun, and that's what my dad carried in the Second World War. But the 30 caliber M1 carbine they also made with a folding stock. So it actually folded down here underneath, and it was a wire stock that would fold down underneath like that. And that way it shortened it even more, and that was to help the paratroopers have less bulk that they had to keep up with. It wouldn't be sticking out from their body as much. So they controlled easier, and it was a lot easier for them to get into action once they got on the ground. This is part of the stuff that they would use. The paratroopers would have like this on their belts. It would hold 2 magazines of 20 rounds each, and a lot of times they would have 4 of these on them, so that they had plenty of capability of being able to fire right away. And this can keep up with it. It snaps closed, it goes on your web belt, open it up, pull your magazine out, and you're ready to go. That's why they could get into action so quickly. Okay, the last firearm that we've got to show today is the 30 caliber M1 Garand rifle. This was the only semi-automatic rifle available to the U.S. military troops when the Second World War started. It replaced the 03A3 Springfield bolt-action rifle. It's still in 30-06 caliber. This is the bullet that fits into it. It was in an 8-round end-block clip, and this is a true clip. It fits into the rifle up here like that. This is the one, if you've heard some of the old ones talking about, they talk about a M1 or a Garand thumb, because when you put it in, you push that down with that thumb, and you got to be kind of quick because that bolt closes up and it can get you. So you want to make sure you're very well practiced in that, or you come up getting a bashed thumb, which is not comfortable at all. One unique feature of the M1 Garand, after the last round was fired, not only was the bolt held back, it would shoot this clip out, and it had a very distinctive ping. Now the Germans thought they were pretty slick. They started listening for that ping over there. They knew that somebody was having to reload their ammunition. Well, our guys were just a little bit smarter, because they started carrying one of these extra clips with them on a lanyard or a string, and every now and then they would only fire 3 or 4 rounds and they would ping that thing real quick. And when the enemy would raise up because they thought they were going to be able to take care of them, that was their demise, because they still had bullets in the rifle. But that's one of the little problems they had. But this is called an end-block clip, ENBLOC, that goes for the Garand rifle.
Can you show the difference? We did not make those bullets in Evansville. Pull the other bullets up that we made in Evansville, just a comparison size, and also the 50 that we used in our airplane here.
There's the 45 caliber right here. That's for the handgun and the Thompson submachine gun, along with the A2 submachine gun.
And you compare it to the other, look at the size there.
And then you have the 30 caliber M1 Carbine. It's a narrower but taller bullet. And then the last thing of production from Chrysler was the 50 caliber machine gun, Browning machine gun. These were used not only by ground forces, they were also used extensively in aircraft.
Did we make the 50 caliber here?
We made some 50s here. It was a limited run, but we did make 50 calibers here. The bullet alone, just the bullet part, is 750 grains in weight. Just putting that in perspective, there's 7,000 grains in a pound. So that's 1/10 of a pound sitting there approximately, or just a hair over 1/10 of a pound that it's shooting out downrange. These go for miles, basically.
That's what we had on the P-47s. We had 8 Browning automatics on the P-47. They shot for 21 seconds, 250 bullets from each gun. So you usually had 1,000 bullets in each wing, but they're very powerful. As strong as a 150 truck going 60 miles an hour when all were shooting at one time.
Correct.
And
this is the bullet that Audie Murphy was shooting out of the machine gun on the tanks when he held off a battalion of Germans and earned his Medal of Honor. He almost got blown up with that tank. It was on fire when he got off of it finally. That was the 30 BMG is what they call that. That's one of the guns now that is very popular for sniper rifles that's used by the military, that they fire over a mile away and take out the enemy.
With accuracy.
With deadly accuracy.
Within a foot of diameter.
Well, they're shooting them over a mile and they're killing somebody. Yeah. They're hitting them. And it's not just a wounding thing, it's taking them out completely.
Okay, and that's the more modern one, not the one we have in front of us.
Correct.
Yeah. Tell us about the distance on this, and tell us, Patton said this won World War II, the gun right in front of you.
This was the one that Patton bragged on so much. He said it was the best.
Pick it up, put in your hand.
Said it was the best rifle that had ever been made and given to the military. This is the one that he credited with winning World War II. I can't say that it alone did it, but it sure had a heck of a big hand in it, I'll tell you that right now. These are very, very accurate, out to 1,000 yards. They used these quite a bit. They put a scope on them, and they would use them for sniper rifles. The advantage of these over the bolt-action rifles, these had 8 shots, so they were quick repeat. If you had somebody that was really good on there, he could take out 8 enemy combatants from 500 plus yards easily before they ever really realized where he was. And by that time, the sniper's moving. But he's also got their heads down because they know he's out there and he's taking them out.
The sight on that, there's usually a sight. Is a telescopic sight most of the time, or not necessarily?
They have telescopic sights they put on them. It normally comes with an aperture sight, which is a little O-ring on the back, and what they call a peppercorn sight on the front. It's a flat top sight. And I can show you that a little bit better like this. But this is a gas-operated firearm, as is the 30 M1 carbine. But the accuracy on this is very, very good. It's got a good little recoil, but it's not uncomfortable. You can shoot these. I've shot one of these for most of a day and still was able to use my arm that night, so I can't complain too much.
The weight of that's about double that other
The
one?
weight of this one is about 8.5 pounds. For your 30 M1 carbine, you're looking at about around 5. So there's a big difference, and of course with the ammunition there's a phenomenal difference, because you've got one of these, or take that out, one of these, and that makes a...
Put them up next to each other. Hold them up there.
That's what I was trying to get it lined up on my fingers there, so you get an idea of the difference.
Between on the left would be the Garand. On your that one's a Garand.
The right hand side is the 30-06 caliber. It's the Garand firearm round, and this was the 30 carbine round.
That could be used in your M1 carbine. What other guns? Other guns?
That's pretty well it. Modern firearms, they've got pistols that shoot those. But as far as anything else, that was all it shot in, was the carbine rifle.
So this rifle in front of you, Brian, is pretty important. When he was going up in Italy and trying to attack Germany, and with 800 yards range, it made a whole big difference, as opposed to 400 yards in with a pistol at 50 yards.
Well, in Europe there was a whole lot more open ground, so they had longer distances, and so they had to have a firearm there that would shoot those longer distances accurately. That's why they used these. The M1 Garand was just really a fine firearm to use in that aspect, because it was reliable. It could be used all day. Again, like any firearm, it has to be clean, but it could take a lot of abuse and a lot of dirt before it would fail to function. All right, we'll kind of reiterate things a little bit. This is a large majority of the type firearms that were used by our American soldiers and sailors in the Second World War. We had the 45, the M1911A1 45. This shell right here, there were over 3 billion of those made in Evansville, Indiana by Evansville Chrysler Corporation. And that was in 4 years. And they turned out a phenomenal amount of ammunition, and it served very, very well. It also was used in the Thompson submachine gun. It was very, very important to all of our soldiers. The next was the 30 M1 carbine. And there's the shell for that again. It was very important. Paratroopers used these, Marines used these, Navy personnel used these, Seabees even used a lot of these. They were small, they were short, they were easily handled. You could carry a lot of ammunition without a lot of trouble, and they did their job very efficiently.
Tell us about that bullet on top of it. Go back to that. Yeah, that bullet.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the 30 carbine bullet.
Keep it on top of the gun. Yeah. That.
Just like that.
Yes.
Normally you would have 20, but if you had the banana clips, you'd have 30.
And that's a 20 banana clip in the gun right now.
That is a 20 clip. That's just a straight clip is all that is.
And how many we make in Evansville of those, Brian?
These were approximately 450 million bullets.
Maybe 30% of all made in the United States.
It was close to about 28 to 30% of what was made in the U.S. and used in the Second World War. May not sound like a lot, but when you get to lining those things up, you got a whole lot of steps you're going to have to take to get from one end to the other.
Okay, and then the last gun there.
And the last one is Patton's favorite. That was the 30 caliber Garand, 30-06 caliber. This is the cartridge for it. A lot heavier cartridge, shoot a lot longer, a lot further. Very accurate gun. And it held 8 at a time. And usually they would have a belt on, a Garand clip belt would hold about a dozen of these clips. So when they went into action, they had a pretty good little bit of firepower there with them. And of course, they also had the supply sergeant close at hand, they hoped, to have a whole lot more ammunition to go with it. The 3 very, very important firearms used in the Second World War. And some of them went on into Korea too. The Garand, the 45, even the carbine, they all were used in Korea too. So they have a long storied history about them. The M1911 is all the way from 1911. The carbine was from about 1942. The Garand was in the 1936, if I remember correctly, is when it started being produced.
All right, thanks.
This is a model of the P-47 Lightning that was produced here in Evansville. They made over 6,000 of them here. I think there were over 8,000 of them made in Farmington also. This had 4 50 caliber machine guns on each wing. They were offset, and the reason for that is they had one loading door up here for the ammunition to go in. They came in belts. They're normally linked together in 250 rounds per belt, and of course this is the 50 caliber. It laid in just like this, down in this area. You would have one line of 50 caliber ammunition up here in the front, and it would come over to the gun number 1. Right behind that would be another line. It would come to gun number 2 and so forth down to gun number 4. But they would open this compartment up and take the ammunition out of the boxes, out of the regular ammo cans that you can buy today at the surplus stores, lay it down there and put it into the gun and get it ready to go. They were devastating when they opened all these eight guns up at one time. It made a lot of noise. They could only fire them for about 21 seconds and they'd be out of ammunition. So they had to learn to be real light on the trigger finger on there. The wings for these, a lot of those were made at Cervell Corporation. That was at the corner of Franklin and Kentucky Avenue here in Evansville. That, of course, is gone now. They used to have a birdcage canopy on them, but a gentleman at Hoosier Cardinal came up with the idea of making the bubble top like this so a pilot could see who was behind him and what was behind him. Great improvement. The pilots loved that. The plane was affectionately known as a Jug, but it was a tough plane. It was air cooled, so the engine was so much better than the other fighters up to that time frame. They would take a huge beating and still bring that pilot back home. I've seen pictures of them with the tails blown halfway off of them, and the pilot still walked away later on. They did have some armor protection in the cockpit for the pilots to help, and that's one of the reasons our pilots survived so much better than like the Japanese. There was no armament or armor cover for the pilots in the Zeros. If you hit them, they were like paper, they were gone. But our pilots came back a lot better off. But the old Jug did a wonderful job of doing that, bringing them back. And we produced over 6,000 of those right over here at the Republic Aviation, which is now known as the old Whirlpool plant on North 41. It's right by the airport. The airport served very well for us because the planes would come out of the back of the plant, they would come over here, they would take a test flight with them, they'd land back here, and they went to the ferry people. The ferry ladies, most of the time, were the ones taking these out of here and taking them to the bases to be put into action. Yeah, during the war, of course, the men were all fighting. So they had to have people to ferry these planes around, take them around where they needed to be to get them into action. Well, as Rosie the Riveter, the ladies also came into being. They had a huge amount of them. I think, if I remember right, it was around 1,800 that ferried these planes, and they ferried all of them, the fighters, the bombers. If it flew, they flew them. And they didn't get much credit for it, and they really deserved a whole lot. They would take them from here up by Lawrenceville, Illinois. That was a central point there, and they would be distributed out from there. They would either go east or west. Some of these ferry pilots also piloted planes up to Alaska, so the Russians could get those planes and take them over there on the Lend-Lease program. People don't really always know about that. When the planes were put together and started to come out of the plant over here, out of the east end there, they would bring them out, and the first thing they would do was check the brakes. They had to make sure they could stop. After that, they had a setup out there where they checked the compasses on there, because if the compass didn't work right, you had a whole lot of lost people. So they had to make sure that was going right. So that was the second thing was checked. The third thing, they would take them out here. The bunker is gone now, the backdrop. They would line the guns up and test fire them. These were all bore sighted in as they were mounted into the plane, so that they would sight to a certain distance. And that can be adjusted overall. You have to remember, this is a 50 caliber shell that they're shooting out of this thing. If you look under the picture, and it may not be easy to see, you'll see little dots under the wing here, right under where the gun emplacements are. That's these shells that are getting dropped out after they're fired. The shells were linked together with clips in 250 round belts, fed into here, so when they fired those, the clips and the bullet, the shells, empty casings, were dropped out the bottom of the wing, so the plane got lighter all the time as it fired. But this was one of the routines that it had to go through before it could ever fly out of here, before the ladies could take off in it and take it wherever it had to go. Okay, what we've got here is a picture of the interior of Republic Aviation Indiana Division while they were in full production. And it's amazing. You wouldn't believe how many they turned out of these things when they were going. In this picture altogether, there's 12 P-47s in production right there. At the beginning of the day, they might have all 12 of these on the floor. At the end of the day, they were flying away out of here. They were done. They just did such a tremendous job here. The people got into it. They supported the military. They supported the government. And they turned out, I think, one every couple of hours, if I remember correctly, which is, you know, it's mind-boggling to me. Now, some people might say, well, that's no big deal, but Henry Ford wasn't turning out their B-25s quite that quick.
B-24s. He put out one an hour, and we put out one every 2.5 hours of these, which we had no support like Willow Run up where he made. Oh, yeah. He had tremendous more.
Yeah, if you've ever seen Willow Run, it's something else to see. But this was the interior of the plant right over here at St. George Road and Highway 41. The planes would get done, they'd roll out the back, they'd go through their brake check, their compass check, setting the guns in, and out the runway. Okay, what we've got here is another item made in the Chrysler Corporation plant here in Evansville. This is an arming wire for incendiary bombs. They made them in ranges up to 500 pounds here. What this did, it made sure that bomb did not arm inside that plane and possibly set the plane on fire. They had different lengths of them, so that when the bomb started to drop away out of the bomb bay, it went so far, the wire was pulled, and that arm diffused. Now, they had different types of detonators on these. Some were impact, which by its own name, it has to hit before it will go off. Some were proximity, so that when they got close to an object, they would go off. And then they had altitude or altimeter detonators. When it got to a certain altitude, that's when it would go off. It depended on what they were wanting to go after and where. If they were into say a forested area and they're wanting to burn that up, it's a very good chance to have a proximity fuse in there. Same with buildings like in Tokyo and other places in Japan, as well as Dresden, Germany. They had a lot of buildings, and they went to burn them down and blow them up. So they would usually have like a proximity on that, or an impact. Very few used the altimeter type on there because that was the most expensive to produce, for one thing. But this would make sure that the bomb was going to free fall away from the plane out of the bomb bay. It would arm that fuse so it was ready to go after that. You did not want that bomb armed inside that plane, because if it did happen to go off because of the nature of the stuff, it would burn the plane up immediately and you'd lose your whole crew plus the plane. So you had to have a device so that it would fall away from the plane and get armed and be ready to go when it hit.